guy in the room, which we'll establish over the course of this time that we're hanging out with it, because I had a lot of memories about that season. But also, when I watched this, I kept thinking, like, what might have been. Like, you think about the fact that Tom Brady was a couple of years into his career as a backup in New England. Nobody thought anything of him. And all of a sudden, it takes that injury for him to get the opportunity. And then when you watch the whole show, like the amount of times that things could have gone left, but instead they went right. And it creates this entire chapter. Like, I kept looking at it thinking, how many things had to break the right way, Scooby, for like the best player in the history of the league, according to many people, to actually get on the field? Like, that's a stunning reminder of how it all started to me.
Isn't that how destiny is? In order for things to work out, certain things have to fall in your favor. Tom Brady has said it himself. It also took some luck in his career to get to this point where he is. And for me, it was inspiring. I was fired up after watching this documentary. Some of the quotes that he had about hard work and just about motivation and what he had to do to get this job, it really inspired me. And it was even better to see that this was that moment in his career this year that really lit that fire for the greatest football player of all time.
Can we also acknowledge he's better looking today than he was then? By the way, like, I mean, like, dude has
like
gotten
fine
like,
wine.
I mean, I'm telling you, like, that old guy in the room likes that too. Like, there's a lot of hope for it, you know, all day, every day on that, Victoria.
Well, and I think, I couldn't agree more. It's like fine wine. It gets better with age. But I think another thing too is that he was the ultimate underdog. Like, there was not a chance for this guy. And like you guys said, everything just kept going right. And it was destiny. But he was also someone who was incredibly curious and determined to get there. Like, he wasn't going to accept no. And it just shows you that if you put the effort in and then everything kind of falls into place, like, this guy had the vision and dream of, I'm going to be the best. And this is how I'm going to do it. But he did it kind of the right way. So I loved it. I think it gave us a whole other side of it, but it also reminded us of kind of how it started and what could have been and how everything fell into place. And so before we get into the nitty gritty of the episode, let's jump in on the time machine and take ourselves back to what we remember about the 2001-2002 season. Now, I was in first grade when this all was going down. I remember folks being pretty taken aback that BLEDSOE was out and this new guy was coming in. But I remember in school, like, I started to see the BLEDSOE jerseys that kids would wear turn into Brady jerseys. And there was this like shift in the fandom of the past. There was almost this like resurgence of like people are talking about the Patriots. And I think there was this curiosity of how things were changing so quickly because BLEDSOE was the guy and then he wasn't. And so like we talked a lot about that team mentality in school. And so I feel like I remember like going into 9/11, this whole mentality of the Patriots shifted around that time too. And I remember that we were all pretty inspired in our teachers, because what do you teach a first grader about, this horrific terrorist attack? And I remember they talked a lot about, like the Patriots, we have to rally as a team and we're bigger than just ourselves. And I feel like that was my first experience where a professional sports team was inspiring a greater audience and a cause. And that was such a challenging time in our country, but such a powerful moment for the Patriots to step up and take an even greater pride in wearing red, white, and blue and not playing. And I know we kept having American Flag Day a few months after 9/11, and I'd say probably about 75% of the school would be wearing some form of Patriots gear. And I feel like it brought a whole new level of that pride and that New England Patriots pride.
But in fairness, for anyone that doesn't know, you grew up in New England, right?
So, I did, yes.
That's a part of it, I think, and everybody that has consumed any of my work on ESPN knows I'm a diehard Raiders fan. So this season had some moments that weren't happy for me. We'll get into those. But, I think about overall the season, and what really hits me is the 9/11 portion of it. It was a small part of the episode, but a huge part of life. And I was 24 when all of this happened. Like I'm 44 now, right? So, so I think I've done the math right. I don't know. I was in my early 20s when all this happened. And the decision to play was such a interesting one the week after 9/11, because as a country, we were shell-shocked. Nobody had ever lived through anything like this. I understand Pearl Harbor for its this was the Pearl Harbor for my generation, right? So it was the day that sort of brought everything to a standstill, and you said, oh my God, how could this happen to us? And then you're trying to figure out, how to get back to normal life. And like I was touring in a band that nobody ever heard of. And, you know, as we went through that year, trying to figure out where you were safe was such a huge part of it. Like, were you comfortable being around events? Like the decision to play after 9/11, I look back at the NFL history, and the only other time they didn't play was the weekend after the JFK assassination. So around America, there was a real conversation happening every day, not just on the ESPNs of the world, but on news about, you know, when do we get back to normal? Are we allowed to do these things? Are you allowed to have these releases all the way to the Super Bowl? You know, and the Super Bowl was such a tense moment in this country because we genuinely didn't know if everybody would be safe being around it. And like, it's hard to remember that for a lot of people that have grown past it. But that entire season was about the, oh my God, are these players safe? Should they be on the field? Should they be playing sporting events? Are the fans safe if they're in the crowds? Like all of these questions that we didn't have answers to that were bigger than football. And I watched this season and this remembrance, and it took me back to so much of that, not as a Patriots fan, but as an NFL fan, saying, man, it was the return of the NFL that provided a return of normalcy for so many of us. It was like that SNL episode that's famous the weekend after 9/11 where, you know, they came back. Like there was, that was the real hit for so many of us, Scooby. And like, I lived through that moment, and it really took me back, like, to all of the fear and emotions and everything that we went through as NFL fans that season represented. It was bigger than just the Patriots. It was about America, as cheesy as that sounds.
Yeah. And when we talk about starting from day one, I'm going to take it back to, you know, some of the things that really hit me about this episode with Tom Brady. As a former football player myself, I've always been really curious as to what really set the foundation for Brady to become a great football player. And the question was answered for me in this documentary. I wrote down Tom Brady's foundation of football was embedded with a team mindset because of his college head coach. The quote was, "No man is more important than the team, the team, the team, the team." It's all about the team because Tom Brady saw it as he didn't know what his strengths were early on, but he knew with a team together, they would heighten his weaknesses and shine his strengths, because at the end of the day, a team is a culmination of talent. And Tom Brady really understood that from his head coach in college, and it ended up tying together perfectly with Bill Belichick. I mean, when we talk about team, the Michigan team, it's almost beautiful how all this tied together because they chose not to be announced individually when they would come out for games. After 9/11, the Patriots made that decision themselves that they would no longer come out for games as individuals, but rather be introduced as a team. And that dates back to what Tom Brady did in college. And then he brought it to the pros. And this team mindset is really where his DNA was formed from, where that foundation came from. And this Patriots team was really seen as an underdog during that time of the year. And they said, you know, that turning point of the season was when they were 5-4 on Sunday Night Football. And that was a big game they had against the Rams. And then when 9/11 happened, they ended up coming together as a team because they were really inspired by Andruzzi, because he reminded them of being an underdog. Their name is the Patriots. And they kind of saw themselves as a symbol of hope. So that 9/11 moment, I was in 4th grade. I remember that day. And this was really the year where I became a Patriots fan because I had just moved to the United States from Africa. I had just came from Zimbabwe. So I was still trying to figure out what this game of football is called. And then this tragic event happens. The Patriots end up taking our city and state by storm. And I had no idea what the Super Bowl was. And I remember watching it as a little, like, I love football now.
And I think, Scooby, like, that's a lot of people, like, this whole, and we'll get into it with BLEDSOE and the Patriots in their past, but there are whole chapters of Patriot football that are forgotten. And as much as we make it about the fact that Brady and Belichick came together, as much as it's about that and they won a bunch, that's great. There was also a change in the entire national conversation around the New England Patriots. Like when you've got a team called the Patriots that wears red, white, and blue, that wins the Super Bowl in the year after 9/11, like all of these things just lined up. And again, I'm not, until Tom Brady sits down with me and admits that it was a fumble and there's no such thing as a tuck, I got no love for the Patriots, but I understand why everybody did. And that's such a huge part. What you live, Scooby, I think is what a lot of people that didn't have a favorite football team got one that year because of what that meant for everybody.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with both of you. And I think I actually talked to my parents about that. And I asked them about, what was it like watching that Super Bowl? And my mom was like, we all were just holding our breath. Like we were excited to watch the game and excited about who was playing, but they're like, we were all kind of holding our breath. And then in the halftime show where they showed all the names and all the people that had lost their lives, it was really a defining moment in America, and a moment where people took an extra pride and being a Patriots fan. And I think even newer Patriots fans emerged from that. And so it was just this crazy kind of fate and destiny and pride that came out of such tragedy when it came to the Patriots. And so, any NFL fan knows a little bit of the backstory behind Brady's emergence in the NFL, but this really pulled back the curtain on an incredible journey, a journey that almost, like you said, Fitz, shouldn't have been. And so I kind of want to ask you both, was there anything in the episode that you didn't know about, or probably like just blatantly surprised you, where you were like made that face? Or maybe you didn't make that face, but Fitz, we'll start with you.
I think, I don't know, because it was such a significant season for me. I don't know that a lot surprised me, but I will say this. Seeing Tom Brady be so open about laughing at himself and laughing at his own ability, like Tom Brady coming in and basically saying like, I was laughing at sitting at Michigan saying, I'm going to be a household name. And now he is. Like, I think there was a moment for me that even Tom's ability to look back and see how crazy this ride has been, I think is really surreal, because I always say it ad nauseum. I say all the time, it's better to be lucky than good. Now, when you're lucky, you also have to be good, and we've seen the convergence of those two worlds. But I think what was really stunning to me in watching the documentary was seeing how comfortable Tom is, essentially realizing that not only did he work his tail off, but a bunch of things broke the right way to make all of these crazy dreams come true for a kid that, at the time was, you could see a little of it when he would say, hey, not very fast, I'm going to work on that. But, I've got a good work ethic. Like, he knew then that he was going to outwork everybody, but seeing how freshly honest he was about that, like, to me, that really stood out, Scooby.
Yeah, I think the thing that really stood out for me was what he said before that AFC Championship game, where he said, I was scared. And I think I realized that the moment was bigger than what I was ready for. And to hear Brady say that was really time. He said it was the first game that he was scared. And it was for the few times we see Tom Brady as human. And I saw Teddy Bruschi even say himself, I've never heard Brady say that he was scared of the moment. Yeah. And the Steelers were confusing him with blitzes and really making things difficult for him. And then seeing Drew come into that game and Tom Brady talking about when he was on the sideline, he was scared because of how much his ankle hurt. And then to go from being scared to the Super Bowl game where he said he was at peace and even took a nap in the locker room after warming up for 5 or 10 minutes. And he was a lot more calm and relaxed in a game that was bigger than the one that he just got hurt in. So I think for me, that was definitely a moment where I was kind of surprised. And then Brady, when we talk about Brady looking back at all the hard work, and one of the quotes that he had where I was like, I need to get this on a poster or something. He was like, working hard is a very sustainable trait, part of your character. If you don't have that, then at some point your talent wears off. The sustainable part about talent and potential is working hard. And over time, he said he continued to work hard. He said he asked Drew all the questions. Drew said he was even annoying about the way that he was all up in his ear asking him questions. Yeah. He was always in there. Willie McGinnis. By the way, I think we just realized how much of a part Willie McGinnis has in Tom Brady's career. He was it almost seems like Willie McGinnis was that leader that really inspired Brady, because early on he said Will was one of the guys that set it off for the offense and the defense. And if you walked by him,
you had to walk by him to get out of the locker room. So that says enough. That's the alpha. To me,
Scooby,
he was the alpha.
Yeah, like you mentioned that, and I thought it was crazy. Willie McGinnis talking about being in the Super Bowl tunnel and saying, "Hey, like I need you right now. You need to dial it back. Like
calm
we need
down.
you to be calm." Like that to me, I'm looking at it saying, "Who would have ever thought Willie McGinnis should be credited with crafting some of the leadership of Tom Brady?" Like we just didn't know that. That's a good point.
And we found that out in this documentary of Willie McGinnis really helped set that foundation of leadership for Tom Brady. So I think those are the things that surprised me. And just to look back on it and say that Brady's hard work is really what prepared him for this moment, because Willie McGinnis said he saw him working. He was asking Drew questions. He was always doing what he needed to do. And before Brady even knew it, he was ready for the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's it pulls the curtain back into his character, into who he is today. And honestly, the fact that Brady didn't know where New England was, and you saw just that very honest, I was like, dude, I respect that. And it was, and I think also the chain of events that led to Bledsoe being sidelined after literally signing $100 million deal. Because I think we're talking about Brady, but Bledsoe was a huge part in Brady's, trajectory, if you will, and how Brady stepped in. And then he was very motivated and curious, but still very conscientious of how Bledsoe was doing and the respect of, respecting your elders in a sense. And I think the honesty and the, how Bledsoe spoke about, despite the heartbreak, he had such grace and didn't get nasty about the circumstances. And he still was a good human and understood the bigger team mentality. And I think we can all be inspired about that when we live in this challenging space of this like indirect competition with one another, where it's like, no, we're all in this together. And so, I want to talk about Bledsoe, because this might, like we said, it's about Tom Brady, but this episode was just as much about Drew as it was about Tom, and how that all played a role into a bigger picture.
Yeah, well, and Victoria, you think about that, a couple of layers to that. Number one, let's talk about Willie McGinnis again and what it must have been like in a locker room where you've got Bledsoe, then you've got Brady, and you might have Bledsoe at the end, so that had to be difficult. We talk about Belichick, and I can't believe that a coach, and let's not forget the fact that this wasn't Belichick's first job. It was his second job. He was fired at Cleveland. This was his second job, right? And so most coaches don't get a third chance. So here you've got a coach that's got $100 million quarterback that decides to sit that $100 million quarterback. The level of guts it takes for a coach that hadn't necessarily won to that level. Like, he put his job on the line right there, saying like, all right, I'm putting my job on the line for Brady, which is crazy. But then you could still feel today the hurt from Bledsoe. Like, he was very real in this episode. Like, I saw a man that has a Super Bowl ring. He has one Super Bowl ring in his career, and it was the game he didn't play in. And you can see that still, like him openly admitting that he went to Montana and just cried after they won the Super Bowl because he didn't feel like it was his. Like, you're talking about $100 million quarterback. And, there was a period in my life when I grew up in Vegas. I moved to New England. When I moved to Maine. I lived in Maine for a few years. And I remember my mom and dad took me to a Patriots game. And this was a Patriots game in the early 90s, Old Foxborough. So I went into Old Foxborough, and there were like 7 people there. Like, nobody was there. The football team was terrible. There was no hype for New England. It was a Patriots team that at one point had so little standing in Massachusetts, they actually threatened to move to Connecticut. Like, there's all of this forgotten Patriots history of irrelevance around the franchise. They had the first overall pick. They used it on Drew Bledsoe. And if you look back, his numbers are okay. He was not okay. He was worth every dollar of the $100 million he got. He was on bad football teams, and he made those bad football teams better. Like, he set the Patriots up to have that next sort of chapter of relevance. They went between 85 when they lost to the Bears, and when Bledsoe came in 95, I think that was right around those mid-90s. When that happened, that in-between period, the Patriots as an organization were poorly run. The ownership was terrible. They had no talent on the field. They were irrelevant. And Bledsoe came in and was like, I don't care. We're going to be fine. And he helped change the culture. So now you have a guy that helped change. Right. He changes the culture. He's worth $100 million. and he loses his job to injury through no fault of his own to a kid that wasn't highly touted, that may or may not have had a roster spot anywhere else.
Yeah.
And then he keeps all of this. He goes in, he balls out against Pittsburgh in the AFC Championship game in a way you would think he gets his job back. And Belichick still has the you-know-whats to be like, we're going to go with the kid in the Super Bowl. All of these things, credit to Bledsoe, credit to Belichick. But I do think that the Drew Bledsoe story deserves more shine. He's been forgotten because he lost his job to Tom Brady. But if that's a reason to be forgotten, then most quarterbacks in NFL history should be forgotten because you lost your job to the greatest of all time.
Yeah, Willie McGinnis said it himself. He said, I don't think Drew did it for Tom, but he did it for everybody. This was something that he did for the entire team. And Tom Brady even said Drew did it gracefully. He never let those emotions negatively impact him in any type of way, even though everybody knew that he wanted to play. And I remember in the documentary, Drew said it took about 4 or 5 weeks until he realized, wait a minute, that seat might not be warm for me anymore when I get back, because Brady was playing really well. And at that moment where he realized that, I'm about to lose my position, he did everything that he could to really help Brady and be that leader on the team. Drew got them there. Tom Brady took them over. And that's kind of what it was. He was unfortunately that scapegoat that needed to be the story to help the person up. And that's kind of his part in this story. And I remember when he was talking about that game after the AFC Championship game, thinking that he might have a chance to start. Drew knew all along that at the end of the day, if Brady's going to be healthy, I feel like I'm not going to play. He said he knew it. And he also even said that he kind of internally said to himself, maybe his ankle really isn't healing, kind of just hoping that I hope it's not 100% healed so I can at least get in this game and play with my guys. But he's really played a huge part in this. And without Drew, Brady wouldn't be here. And it takes that type of leadership to be able to help a team get to where it was. And that switch up where Willie McGinnis had to deal with not knowing which quarterback is going to be under center. It took leadership as well in the locker room with all those guys to not only believe in whoever is under center, but also believe in the decision of your head coach.
Let me ask you guys a question, though. All right, because this is 2001. And if you go back to 2001, this is pre-Twitter. This is pre-social media. This is pre-5,000 podcasts. This is pre-ESPN having First Take, right? This is back when most of the sports coverage was based on whatever news was coming out and then rights around games. We didn't have the same debate shows happening 24/7. We didn't have a bunch of networks that yelled about everything. Do you believe that? Because if you watch the Bledsoe quotes, I think we're putting a little bit of halo lighting on him. There's a little of an Instagram filter. He was pretty hey, I'm not happy about it. That's all I have to say. He was pretty gruff. If he had been that gruff, and then we spent 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day debating it on every single show, do you think they could have made it through? Because I look back at the Bulls era, from The Last Dance, and I'm not sure that those teams could have been kept together in a social media world the way that the attention goes. I looked back at this 2001 season, and I'm like, man, we would have ripped them apart on every show. Every time we had the chance, it would have been the only talking point. I'm not sure they could have played Kumbaya together in today's world.
I agree with you. I don't think I feel like in the pre-Twitter social media debate show world, I feel like it wouldn't have been as seamless as it seemed to all of us watching as fans. And so I think there was definitely if this happened in today's world, it would be a topic of conversation. But I also think there would have been a lot more pushback that maybe it would have been swayed in another direction. And that's I think sometimes there's been times where public outcry has caused for change. And so I do think it would have complicated things. And I don't think it would have been as seamless. And I also don't think Bledsoe would have come away as gracious as he kind of appeared, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the noise would have been louder, but we also need to remember which head coach is is in the building.
Preach.
Preach.
And he would not give a damn what anybody else has to say. He's going to make the decision that's best for the football team, no matter what.
Yeah.
I kind of love that. And I know, like, we're getting into the decision, but Scooby, like, I love that about Belichick. Like, I walked away from this too saying, like, I know I said earlier, the guts it takes, but also the self-confidence of, like, at the end of the day, you're going to be you. You're going to do what you want to do. Now, I excuse it today whenever Belichick is gruff with people or whenever he's just like, this is the way it's going to be. You know, I excuse it today because he's won so much, you can't question him. In 2001, that wasn't the case. So for him to stand up in front of the team and say, like, hey, sometimes tough decisions have to be made. I have to make tough decisions. There's a level of ownership to that like, I walked away with it with a different level. Not that I didn't already have a ton of respect for Belichick, but a different level of Belichick respect, because I think you're right, Scooby. Like, even if, there had been a first take debating about it, I'm not sure Belichick would have given a damn even then, which is refreshing compared to what we see from most people.
Well, I think too, he wouldn't have cared. He was kind of like, I am who I am. This is what I'm going to do. But I feel like Twitter would have cared. And I feel like people would be like, who do you think you are, sir? Yeah. Like, you have nothing to stand on that. And like, speaking of Belichick, when he made the decision to stick with Tom after the loss of the Rams, I don't think anyone really realized the impact that would not only have on himself, but Tom, the organization, and the world of sports. So, fellas, is it possible that this is the biggest sports decision / the decision that has had the most impact on all of sports in the past 20 years?
Oh, yeah. No doubt. Yeah. I mean, to put in a backup quarterback with very now, I think Rams
the number
fans are
199 selection in the draft, I might add.
But I think Rams fans are probably sitting here saying, hey, what about Trent Green? Like, Trent Green had gotten a huge contract, was injured in the preseason. The Rams didn't address their quarterback position. They're like, hey, we got this kid, Kurt Warner, that played in the Arena League and was a grocery bagger. And so that, I think you could look at that and say, sort of same type of situation, injury created opportunity. I think it's not just an injury created opportunity. It's that Belichick didn't go back to, he gave us some version of Brady that was not 100% in the Super Bowl over BLEDSOE. That's the decision to me that will always reign, is you had your option. You could have gone the safe way and given your $100 million man the opportunity, and he didn't do that. That to me was the moment that sort of set the legacy. It set everything in place, and that's where it became the most impactful decision, I think, of the last long time, at least in the NFL.
It created the trajectory for sure.
Yeah, it has to be one of the greatest decisions ever in sports. And you say that because it's one of the greatest runs in sports ever. Yeah. Which other sports fan can say they watched their football team win 6 Super Bowls?
Sorry, Fitz.
I can. It was amazing. Let me tell you.
Oh, we're going to get to that in a second. Oh, my God.
It was really nice. You know, how many Super Bowls have you watched the Raiders win, Fitz, by the way?
Ooh, guys, this is our first episode. We're getting spicy.
There's a reason that they put us in 3 different rooms. And by the way, one, Scooby, I don't remember it, but it was 1983, and I watched it as a child, apparently. So I've got one.
Okay.
That just goes to show.
Scooby, are you done?
And if the league didn't have a stupid rule about tux, I'd have watched like 18 Super Bowls. Oh, man.
Scooby.
That set it off. This decision set it off. It set off Brady in his whole career. And it took a coach that literally has the same type of mindset as Tom Brady's college coach. As I mentioned earlier, that team mindset. What does Belichick always say? The team, the team, the team. I'm going to make a decision that's best for the team. And this became that perfect marriage because Tom Brady needed somebody that basically modeled what the team does around the team. And Tom Brady came from that in college, a model that elevates everybody based on what the team does. So to have a quarterback that's so team mindset like Brady is was key. And then Willie McGinnis even said himself after that AFC Championship game, hey, we're saying Drew got his job back. We're all thinking Drew's about to play.
Yeah.
Against the Rams, you have to be able to score points against the Rams. But then he laughed. Willie ended up laughing, saying, and he had that look, but Bill has something else to say. And Bill surely has something else to say. And you never know what Bill's going to say. But at the end of the day, you trust his decision and what he's trying to do. And Brady would have been fine after that Monday. After they lost to the Rams, Brady said he would have been fine if coach was like, hey,
Drew, you're the starting quarterback.
Oh, Scooby, we buying that though. Like he's saying that, and that's easy to say now. But we all know that he'd be like, "No, I was fine." But like,
but who knows? All I can do is go by what he's saying in this documentary and say that he's telling the truth. So I'm just gonna go by that because he said he understood and respected it. But at the same time, if you're a competitor, you want your job and you want to play. But then Brady comes out and throws 4 touchdowns the next game against the Saints. So that just goes to show that when he got that opportunity, he took advantage of it and made the best of it.
Yeah, well, and the proof's in the pudding. Like the proof is in the pudding on this stuff too. Like if you're Belichick and you want to be able to cement your entire legacy building a team as I'm a guy that will always put the team first, benching $100 million quarterback for a late round draft pick quarterback that nobody'd ever heard of all the way up and through to the Super Bowl that you won gives you the ultimate no job is safe. I will always give opportunity to the person that earns it. I don't care how much you've been paid. I don't care what your brand is. Like it right then, every single thing that a coach can put on the board but has to prove was proven in one season, 1 year because of the way this played out. So Scooby, you're 1,000% right. Like it cements a legacy and a way of doing business that lasts an entire generation.
Well, and I think we know exactly what Belichick's going to say is that he's doing it for the team, the best decision for the team. And he didn't let the noise or the contracts or how far Brady was in the draft before he got drafted. Like he just was like, this is the decision that we're going to make and stuck with it. And then that became a catalyst to arguably one of the greatest dynasties of all time. Now,
no, arguably, yes,
it is the greatest guy. I'm trying to be respectful.
I know where you're trying to be respectful because you got to ask me about the tuck rule. Like Victoria's trying to be nice, you know.
So I'm trying to, Fitz, you're my friend, and Scooby, you were throwing hot sauce at Fitz right now, and I'm going to throw salt on the wounds at this point. So we hate to do this to you, Fitz, but your Raiders were a huge part of Tom's success story. So when you look back now, I know you're still a little salty, but take us back to that moment, knowing what you know now after watching this episode.
Okay, so first and foremost, shout out to our producer, Dave, because I'm going to do something here, Dave, that I do on Snapchat a lot. And it's either not going to make the episode or you're going to have to beep it. So I'm just going to tell y'all, first and foremost, y'all for making me start this whole thing with the tuck rule. Like I had to skip the tuck. I had to skip that whole section of the document. Like they, we get to see it, right? I get to see it. I'd skip it 3 times before I finally went back and said, okay, I remember where I was sitting in my ex's house, right? Like we're hanging out, and I'm sitting there and she had like a really religious family, right? And like mom and dad didn't believe in swearing. And so I'm sitting in their basement. They weren't big sports fans. I'm watching this all go down. Remember, for anyone that doesn't remember, the Raiders lost the last 3 games of the regular season that year, including a game against the Jets where they might have had to play the Jets in the playoffs. So they went super safe and Gruden didn't have the best play calling. And as a result, from those 3 losses, they're in New England instead of that game being in Oakland, which would have been different. The documentary covers the entirety of this process. I'm watching, all right? I'm watching this blizzard. I'm watching the fumble. I'm fist pumping quietly because God knows that I can't irritate the girl that, I'm dating. I can't irritate her family, right? So I'm fist pumping quietly. And then I see the tuck happen and I'm just sitting there and I can't say anything because the only thing I could say would get me kicked out, right? So I can't say anything. And then her mom looks over at me and says, "It's just a game. It's just a game." Oh man.
Man.
But here's the thing for anybody.
Is that why you broke up?
Is that why she's the ex?
That was the end of a long relationship too. It was it's like I'm never going to want to marry into this family, so this thing is done. All right, so that was a cementing moment for me, which was really looking back on the her family did pretty well and she had health insurance. I really should have stuck with her. Anyway, aside from all of that, the thing that a lot of people don't realize, this is Raiders heads, right? Because of my Raiders fandom. That game was, I remember after the loss, I looked at a friend of mine and I said, look, I would rather, because that was a period where Rich Gannon and the Raiders were unstoppably good every year. And they kept losing weirdly in the playoffs. They kept losing in the like everything one year after the other happened. That was the beginning of sort of the era of close but no cigar for the Raiders. And I remember after the Super Bowl, remember that John Gruden was let go after that game. He was traded to the Buccaneers after the Tuck Rule game. So Gruden goes to the Buccaneers, where he then a year later beats the Raiders in the Super Bowl. There are a lot of people that believe that if the Raiders had won the Super Bowl that year, and they were the best team in the AFC, they would not have traded Gruden. They would have been the best team in the AFC for the next couple of years. 2-3 Super Bowls come out of it. There's no New England dynasty. All of this comes from one game. All of that to say that, there's no such thing as a tuck. It's a fumble. It's a fumble.
Didn't Brady say it himself? That one play changed a lot of people's lives. He said a lot of people's lives and careers would not be the way that they weren't if it weren't for that Tuck Rule, if it weren't for what happened in that game. So,
and on top of that, Scooby, like it's snowing, it's a blizzard. It comes back to, like I said earlier, like certain things have to break right. And forgotten in there was a little moment in the documentary where you saw the cleaning of the field before the game-winning kick. What people don't remember is that Gruden stupidly called timeout before, like you've got one of the best kickers in history at that point. They decide to ice the kicker. And by icing the kicker, what they actually did was they gave New England time to clear that little patch off so that they could place the ball. And to this day, the players involved in that game were like, I don't know why the Raiders called that timeout. It was a tougher kick before the timeout. Those little nuances all broke the right way to get New England the win. And I'll never take anything away from the Patriots getting that win. But that is, as a lifelong diehard Raiders fan, that is the most painful moment I've ever seen, because it gets replayed as one of the greatest playoff games, one of the greatest snow games, one of the greatest endings, a dynastic game, the beginning of the Brady dynasty. Like, I have to see that now. Every time Brady with the Buccaneers plays the Raiders, they replay that damn play. Every time I get to see it over and over and over again. So it is the moment that Raiders fans believe started the beginning of the end and 16 years of absolute awful, while the Patriots got 16 years of greatness. Like, it just, the two teams went in different directions and never recovered.
Completely different directions.
Yep. Yeah. Charles Woodson said it himself. He's like, Brady, man, if it wasn't for me and that Tuck Rule, you wouldn't be where you are right now.
Yeah. And Brady called it that play. And Brady's like, Charles Woodson in that play. What? That play? Put some respect. Good Lord.
Okay, well, this is a very touchy subject, Fitz, but we appreciate your emphasis on that.
That's a deep dive.
We're gonna move on. We're gonna throw you a life raft and move on, because the knee injury during the Steelers game is another huge moment. And luckily it wasn't worse, but just another twist in this incredible story with what Bledsoe did to win that game. Now, what were your guys' reaction when you heard they didn't know who was starting the day of the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think part of that comes back to some of the media conversation around it, too. We talked earlier about the pressure. Like, the media had decided, and you saw it in some of the little clips. Like, I think everybody, I was an ESPN watcher at the time, right? Like, everybody on ESPN had decided that the storybook ending to this would be Drew Bledsoe ironically getting his job back, going in and trying to win a Super Bowl for the Patriots. Story. Like, it had just become the easiest story to tell. So every single day, it felt like that's what everybody was just presuming would happen. So in my mind, for Bill to resist that temptation, again, speaks to not just the internal pressure within the locker room. Kudos to the locker room for staying together, but also just kudos to the entire coaching staff for being like, nope, we've got a plan. We know what we see. It's an inspiring moment to me to see a coach stand on his own 2 feet and say, no matter what you throw at me, this is the direction we're going to go.
This is what we're doing, yeah.
And this goes back to the 9/11 thing that inspired them to come together as a team, right? To trust in each other, because they understand that they are the underdogs and they know which team they're going against, the Rams. They said that after that Sunday night game, Willie McGinnis and the team said, you know what? If we see y'all again, we're going to kick your ass. That's exactly how they felt. Yeah. And they got to see them again. And at the beginning of this documentary, Willie McGinnis takes us back to the first Super Bowl. And he said how he was being pulled in so many different directions of getting tickets for family, trying to do a bunch of things leading up to the Super Bowl. And he said, man, if I come back here, I'm just focusing on the game. And that's what it ended up coming to. And it goes back to what you're saying, Fitz, of all these tiny little things having to interline with each other in order for all of that to get into one pop, pot and be the perfect recipe for Brady to be successful in this game. And I think it was definitely just eye-opening to get this look into Brady's career, get this look into Willie McGinnis's career, because that Rams game, the game against the Rams, was something that they were ready for, and the team embraced the decision when Belichick decided to make Brady the starter. They all went behind him.
Yeah, and I agree with you both. And I think going back to what Fitz said about the media coverage, and it was Bledsoe's comeback, and everyone was kind of like, oh, Brady, like, you were cool and like good for you, but like sit back down. You know, I feel like that was the narrative. And then for Bill Belichick, which, like you said, Fitz, for it being his second team, like, he didn't have a lot to stand on at this point, and he made that decision, just really set up the trajectory that is the Brady Patriots Belichick dynasty in a sense. And so I feel like it was this wild moment where I think everyone was kind of hoodwinked a little bit, where they were like, wait, what? Like you're putting Brady in this game? And I think it was just a moment of like, okay, like something's shifting here. Things are shifting in a different direction. And I think Bledsoe knew that too at that point, like knew like, yeah, this is not looking good. And so I think, you know, moving on from that, I want us to pick out our favorite part of the episode. Now, I'm aware that Fitz is not going to be talking about anything to do with the tug, but it can be really anything, you know, a quote, a moment, something new we learned. And I'm going to go first because I think just seeing and hearing the various perspectives, especially from Bledsoe and seeing his side of the story, but also saying the quote of like, he was just annoyingly inquisitive, was really cool, because Tom wasn't expected early on to be a star. He just kept being super optimistic and determined, and he just kept rising to the occasion when given the chance. And he was hungry for more. He asked the questions. He was wanting to learn. He was wanting to improve. He never felt he was better than anyone else in the beginning, and he knew he had a lot to prove, especially when you look at his draft, you know, his draft profile. There's nothing good about what people said about him. And he was number 199, and was just like, all right, you know, and he himself said, you need a lot of luck, but with that luck, you have to put in the work. And so I think to see that side of it and how he was the underdog and turned into the greatest of all time, earned me a whole different level of respect when it comes to Tom Brady.
I think, you know, sticking with the Tom side of it, for me, you know, I mentioned earlier jumping up and down in the tunnel before the Super Bowl. What really hit me watching that, and the reason it was my favorite moment, I think, was you can look at the little moments of humanity from Tom, you know, and we become so used to who Tom was late in his career with the Patriots, and such a robotic, you know, this is what we do, this is how we do it. And we've seen a different version of Tom the last couple of years with Tampa Bay, right? And, you know, I think there was this presumption that Tom was always a robot with this great work ethic that became, now he's just sitting back having fun. I think what we learned is that early on, Tom was very similar to who he is now. Like there was so much similarity in the level of joy. It was fun for me to watch one of the greatest of all time, but see him enjoy the process of becoming one of the greatest of all time. Because we've all talked about the work that it takes. It's hard when you're in that work sort of tsunami to step back and appreciate the ride. And that's what we saw from that version of Tom. It was, I think, incredible to see that level of joy.
Yeah, I think
the human side of it.
Yeah, 100%. Because for me, it was really cool to see what it is that drove Tom Brady early on. And early on in your career, especially when you're about to start elevating, there's certain things that set the foundation. It's really important to set a good foundation early on, because that creates your habits, that creates your work ethic, and it sets a foundation for that. And when at the end of the documentary, Willie McGinnis talked about how this experience with Drew Bledsoe was an important lesson for Tom, because he had to learn that you have to fight to stay in that position where you're at. And there's always somebody over your shoulder. And it's how Tom Brady got his job. He got his job from always being over somebody's shoulder, asking questions. And then quickly, that took me back to Jimmy G in New England. Yeah. I even wrote down in my notes, this relates to Jimmy G, because Tom Brady definitely, you have to think that he saw Jimmy himself and Jimmy Garoppolo asking those questions. The guy that they drafted that still might take his spot, they're not really sure. Immediately, that's what came to me. And then just getting to that mindset of how Tom is a hard worker. He talked about hard work and those steps and how you have to be ready for the opportunity. And he said he always had confidence in himself and always thought that if you put me on the field, you're not going to take me off. That started in Michigan. And he told us a story when he was sitting in the cafeteria with his parents, how he said, one day I'm going to be a household name. I don't know why that moment really resonated with me because I'm a big person on speaking things into existence and action. And I think that was a moment for him too, where he's like, for all of us, we say things and want to accomplish certain things. And then one day you say, man, like 20 years ago, I said that I would do this. I'm doing it right now. I'm freaking doing it. And that was the moment for Brady. And we saw him express that moment live in action. And he just talks about how a series of small steps seem so insignificant when you're making them. And then when you look back, you realize how far you've traveled. That's how progress is made. There are so many little quotes in this documentary and pieces of advice that we all should hold on to, because this is a person who has accomplished a number of different things that no other human being would do for the rest of their lives. So it's important to take what he's saying and hold on to it, because what he said has helped him succeed. And I guarantee those small pieces of advice can help us in life as well. So that's what I really took from it, and that I enjoyed, of just how Brady always has that, I'm not comfortable. There's somebody always over my shoulder trying to get my job, because that's how I got my job. And I worked hard. And I knew I didn't have the talent, and I knew I didn't have the skill. I knew I was slow and sluggish, but I did what I could do to make myself the best. And I focused on the team as well at the same time.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said that better, Scooby. Like, it's, he is superhuman by today's, when anyone you think of Tom Brady, but this is such a human side of him where he had all the odds stacked against him, but he took tiny steps of progress. He asked the questions. He essentially knocked on the doors where he realized this isn't going to come to me. Nothing is going to be served to me. If anything, I'm going to have to serve to other people in order to earn the respect and earn the chance to show what I can do. And I think that is such a great example. And I think all of us kind of know that being at ESPN is that there's power in setting up those connections, is putting one foot in front of the other, knocking on doors, not being afraid of the no's and being afraid of the, well, this is why it won't work out. But there's like a 1% chance that it will. And Brady's the type of person that there was 99 reasons why he wasn't going to ever be a household name or wasn't ever going to be a star. And he took that 1% and said, I'm going to take this 1% and I'm going to give everything that I have. And I think that's such a great inspiration to everyone watching. And I'm like super fired up for this series. Like I want more, and I want to keep talking about this. So it's really cool to see a whole different side to not only Brady and his story, but the many players and folks who played a role in establishing this dynasty. And BLEDSOE, he's someone who at times I think we forget about because how crazy successful Tom and the Pats have been. But this is so much more than that.
Yeah, I'm all in for more of this. I just want more of this that doesn't involve the tuck rule.
We've gotten past that part, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now.
Now I can just relax, and then every time think I could have been the Raiders in that Super Bowl. That's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, I think that'll do it for us right now on that note, Fitz. So thank you everyone for watching After the Arena, presented by Under Armour. I'm Victoria Arlen. He's Skubie Mageza. He's Jason Fitz. Catch us next week after episode 2 of Man in the Arena.
Whoop.